So, hi everyone, and welcome to this talk. My name is Jesper Wilhelmsson, and I work with JVM development at Oracle. And in this talk, I will try to guide you through how to become an Open JDK contributor. So let's see if this works. Yay! So the Open JDK project. Let me start with a few words about the project as such. The project governs the Java programming language and the Java runtime. And Oracle is one of the main contributors to OpenJDK, the largest contributor, I'd say. Oracle maintains the OpenJDK project and hosts infrastructure for testing and source mirrors and such for the open community to use. The project has several other big contributors, of course, both large companies and personal, like individuals who are contributing to the project. The OpenJDK consists of groups who work together around some kind of common interest. This interest could be technical areas within the JDK, or it could be like aspects of the programming language. So there's a couple of examples there, but each of these groups maintains their own mailing lists, and they can also have like wiki contents for documentation and such. And each of these groups may also sponsor projects. So a project within the OpenJDK is a collaborative effort to produce a specific artifact. So there are a number of different projects. One of the more famous ones is the JDK project, which is where the current implementation of JDK 14 is happening. We also have the JDK updates project, where JDK 11, for instance, is currently living. Projects can produce artifacts like features in the language or features in the JVM. The projects can also be a collaborative effort to produce, investigate tooling or produce tooling around the OpenJDK to help with development. And there can also be projects like the Duke project, for instance, where we collect images of our famous Duke mascot. So a participant in OpenJDK can be a member of different groups and have different roles in different projects. So this is just an example of that. So the different roles that the person can have in these projects. Well, if you're new to the project, you would start out as an author. An author is someone who is contributing, like helping out in mailing lists and maybe have suggestions for how to implement stuff. But the author is not allowed to push changes directly into the code repository. Any changes made by the author must go through a sponsor. Once the author has contributed a couple of significant changes, there is a vote among the committers of the project to see if this author can become a committer. So all committers get to vote, and if it's deemed to have committed the good enough stuff, then everyone says yes, most often. The same happens later on. If a committer has contributed a large amount of significant changes, he can become a reviewer of the project. So the committer is allowed to push code into the repository. The reviewer is the one with the actual power who is determining if a change is good enough to actually go in. So you need to have the reviewer's approval before you can commit something. Each project also have a project lead who is basically any committer that is suitable to lead the project. If you're interested in reading more about the actual rules behind the project, you have the OpenJDK bylaws that is governed by the OpenJDK governing board. So this is available on the OpenJDK website, so you can read more about it there. So let's see how to actually become a... Whoa. OK, I should not touch that. The open community consists of people like all of us, people who just want to make Java better. And to join the community, the first step would be to go to the Java OpenJDK website and have a look at what projects there are, read through the descriptions of these project pages, and see if there's anything that sparks your interest. If there is, you go to the mail manager, and subscribe to the relevant mailing lists for these projects. And then you can start to actually participate in that project. So let's see how you actually can contribute. So contributions can be many different things. You don't have to push code to actually contribute. Active participation in the mailing list is one way to contribute. You can be a part of the design discussions, you can be part of reviews and how to implement and design different features or functionality. You could also be active behind the scenes, so to speak, and help out with the practicalities around getting actual releases in place and producing the artifacts. You could also do coding, of course. And for the rest of this talk, I'll be focusing on how to contribute with actual code changes. But first, I should also mention that you can actually be contributing to the OpenJDK without spending any time or effort at all. And that's by actually buying a subscription. Buying a subscription, if you have built your business around Java and you are actually making money off Java, then a subscription could be a way to just encourage the developers and maybe say thank you. So before you can actually push any code into the OpenJDK source repository, you need to sign the Oracle contribution agreement. So using this agreement, you will allow Oracle to build and distribute your code, basically. So it's a way of sharing the copyrights to your code. You will still have the copyright, but you're allowing Oracle to also use it. You can sign this as a private person, or an organization can actually sign it for its members. So it could be the fact that you actually already are included in this if your employer, for instance, have signed this agreement already. So a good place to start, if you want to know the process behind and the workflow, is to look at the OpenJDK Developers Guide. So this is available on the OpenJDK website. This, I should mention, is still a work in progress, though. So there are parts missing. And that's actually something that I will be working on once I get back after Code 1 here, to try to fill out some of the blanks in this. I should also note that there are differences between how the engineers work in different parts of the JDK. So on this page, for instance, on the OpenJDK wiki, I have documented most of the process around how we work in the JVM development team. This is getting slightly outdated. You can see on the date, well, it's maybe too small to see, but it was updated more than a year ago. So it's getting slightly outdated. My goal here is, of course, to unify these processes with how we work within the entire JDK and publish this within the developer's guide. So let's try to find something to work on. If you want to contribute, one way to get some stuff to work on is to go to the bug database. So the JDK bug system, JBS, is openly available, and here we have tickets for all the bugs and enhancements and everything that we work on within the Open JDK project. You can query this database. It has a fairly advanced query language that you can use to find all kinds of different issues. A couple of labels that are good to know is the starter label and the cleanup label. So the starter label is something that we put on changes that is well contained and could be a good start for someone who is new to the code base. The cleanup label is used for changes that is pure cleanup, that have no like semantical changes, but just renaming some stuff or reorganizing code. So that can also be a good start if you want to get to know the code base. If you want to read more about the labels in JBS, there is a label dictionary on the OpenJDK wiki. This is currently located in the hotspot part of the wiki, mainly because the JDK doesn't actually have any wiki pages of its own, the JDK project. But the labels are the same throughout the JDK and should be used in the same way all over. So if you have an idea of your own that you want to suggest to the OpenJDK, the best way to introduce it to the community is by sending an email to the appropriate mailing list. You would describe the idea and why you want to make this change, of course. The community is a fairly including community, and people are usually nice on the mailing list. So you will most likely get a lot of help analyzing the pros and cons of your suggestion. If it's a small change, something that would require like less than 2 weeks of engineering time is the usual target for that. You could file an RFE. So this is a simple issue in the bug tracker system where you just type down what you want to do, more or less. For larger features, stuff that would take more than 2 weeks of engineering effort, or something that might require high visibility or be like a controversial change, something that people are likely to disagree with you on, you would file a JEP, enhancement proposal. So it's also a ticket in the bug system, of course, but it has more of a template for you to fill out and how to actually do it. And there are more places for discussions and descriptions in this. I should say that the JEPs have gotten an improportional amount of visibility or something. It seems that for any given JDK release, the list of JEPs is the things that people focus on to say what has changed in the JDK. But note that the difference between an enhancement and a JEP is not based on how much the change actually contributes to the OpenJDK. It's based on the amount of work required to implement it. So there could be, and usually are, a lot of RFEs that are just as important for the Java, for the OpenJDK, than any given JEP. So it's a good idea to look at those as well if you want to know what happens in a release. OK, so I have a feature here that I want to implement. So you probably know about big endians and little endians. And you know that if you want to communicate and send text between these two groups of people who eat their eggs from different ends, you need to swap the first and second part of each word, right? So I want to implement the support for this in the string, Java string class. So I make this an enhancement. I believe this to be quite not that much work. So in order to actually do this change, I need to download the source code. So let's go ahead and do that. The source code is kept in a Mercurial repository. So using just a simple clone command, we can download the entire code base. So this will give you everything. It's the JDK libraries, it's the JVM, it's all of it, documentation and all. There is also a Git mirror that you can use to download the source base. But please note that this mirror is read-only, so you will not be able to push any changes into this repository. When it comes to IDE support, it's a little bit tricky because the OpenJDK source base is so large. As far as I know, no IDE is able to actually contain all of it and help you debug all of it. And one of the biggest problem here is, of course, that we have both Java code in the libraries and C++ code in the VM. So usually, IDEs don't like to work on different programming language like that at the same time. There is support. I mean, NetBeans is fairly easy to use if you want to work on the Java part of the libraries. IntelliJ, the same. We have some script that can be used to build a project for IntelliJ. I believe that this script actually asks you which modules you want to use and include in your project, because there is simply so much Java code that it won't be able to handle all of it at the same time. If you want to work on C++ code, you have a project for Oracle Developer Studio that is included in the source base. And when I asked around in the office, my closest colleagues, just to see what IDEs they were using, you can see there was a fairly wide distribution. And basically, you can use any text editor. I mean, it's just text files, as always, when it comes to programming. So use your favorite IDE. If you know someone, or if you yourself is very handy when it comes to IDEs and how to do these things, the OpenJDK really could use you as a contributor. Because currently, we don't really have many people that know how to use, how to build IDE project files and maintain these things. It's fairly low priority for most people at the moment. So if someone would like to pick that up, that's definitely an area where we could use more contributions. OK, so I just put up my random source editor and open Java-lang string to make my small change here. Try to make it look basically like the code surrounding code. The coding style guide in the developer's guide is currently empty, unfortunately. So just try to make it look like the other code. I mean, you know what looks good, right? Everyone has the same idea about how the code should look, I'm sure. OK, let's try to build this and see if it actually works. So in order to build, we first run the configure script to configure the build. The configure script will require you to have at least JDK 12 installed to use as a boot JDK when compiling the Java classes. And that's when building JDK 14, I should say. There is also a number of different requirements for tool chains and some additional packages that is used to build the JDK. The configure script will tell you what is missing, of course. And in most cases, it will also tell you how to actually get hold of the packages that are missing. So it's a very helpful configure script. Then we go ahead and run make. Make images is a target that will build the entire release image. So that's something that is fairly close to what we actually release as early access builds. It will not have any debug code in it. There will not be any search or anything like that. It will be an optimized image. So if you want to do some serious testing or debugging of the JVM or the JDK, you would most likely want to run with some higher debug level. So you can do that by running configure with this flag with debug level. And there is a target that's called slow debug that will basically enable everything. So there are search enabled, there are debug code, there is no optimizations enabled. So that's most likely what you want to use within a debugger, for instance, when you want to step through the code. OK, so once we have built it, of course, we need to test it as well. Some changes might actually be enough to build the code to see that it worked, if you do refactoring, for instance. But most often, you will actually need to run some tests to see that the code actually works when you execute it as well. So the JDK, the Open JDK project, provides two different test frameworks that you can use for these reasons. So J2Reg is for Java regression tests, and it's used for basically, well, at least most testing that is provided. All the tests that is in the OpenJDK project are written to be run with J2Reg. We also have support for Google tests, so that is mainly used for C++ unit tests in the JVM mostly. We also provide a mercurial forest called the submit forest, where you can push your own changes for testing. So you push your changes there, and we will automatically run testing on your changes and provide some kind of result back to you. So J2Reg, let's look at a little bit more at the details. As I said, this is the regression test harness used by the JDK. You can download it from, there's a link there, OpenJDK website, which has the documentation as well. The tool itself is provided within the Code Tools project, which is where a lot of the tools that we use to build and run the JDK is contained. You can configure your build and tell it where this J2Reg installation is done. And if you do that, you can use make to run J2Reg tests with the run test target, as shown here. You can also use J2Reg as a standalone tool to run J2Reg tests. You would then have to provide the JDK with this JDK flag to tell it which JDK to execute. So the Google test, no, OK, sorry. I rearranged my slides. OK, so this is a small J2Reg test that I wrote to test my change. Basically, this is a clean Java class, which has a main function, a method that is just executing the code that I want to test. You can see that we throw a runtime exception if the test fails, if we don't meet our expected results. And the test harness will catch this exception and report that as a test failure. This test uses two different tags, J2Reg specific tags. There's the test tag and there's the summary tag up in the comment above the code here. The test tag basically tells J2Reg that this class is a test. And the summary provides some short description of what this test is actually doing. There is a lot more of these tags. Those are all described in the J2Reg documentation. And you can, for instance, tell J2Reg, or actually the user more, which bug that this test is a regression test for. You can tell J2Reg about different dependencies, stuff that needs to be fulfilled for this test to actually be usable and be executed. So you can require different operating systems, memory requirements, or anything like that. You can tell J2Reg if it has to use other modules within the Java module system. And you can tell it to use different command line flags and run the test in several different ways. So one test, for instance, can have several of these run tags in the same test if you want to execute the test in several different ways. So now, the Google test framework. So as I said, this is mainly used for native unit tests in the VM. It's used to test data structures and simple functions within the code. The good thing about this is that it doesn't require the JVM to be running when you execute the tests. So you can actually test data structures that would be very fragile to play around with if the JVM was running. So in the directory test hotspot, you will find a lot of tests that is using the Google Test Framework for testing the VM. So the submit repository, as I mentioned, you submit your changes here to get them tested on a wide variety of platforms. You do that by creating a branch. So basically, you clone the repository, you create a branch and push your code into that branch. And then when you submit it back, it will run all the tests on this your modified JDK. The name of the branch, there is a pattern there that has to be fulfilled. So it basically starts with the bug ID of the change you are testing. And then you can add a small substring if you want to, like version 1 or version 2 and things like that. But usually people use the same name, just the bug ID, for instance. And then you can push several times into the same branch and, of course, get it tested for every new change you make. So you don't have to come up with a new name every time you want to test something new. OK, once you have tested your change and made sure that everything works, you would, of course, like to have some reviews here, because someone needs to verify that your code is good enough to include into the project. The request for review, the RFR, is sent out to the proper mailing lists. And if you have something that the change is actually modifying code that is not really obvious from the title of the bug, you might want to call that out in your email to make sure that the right people is actually reviewing this change. The subject of the email usually starts with an RFR and the bug ID. And it's also common to add some this extra large or extra small, just to give a hint of how big this change actually is. The email itself should contain a short description of what problem you're fixing and how. Any issues that things like anything that is resolved in an unusual way would be good things to highlight in your email. Language constructs that's not commonly used in the source base. If you, for instance, use some new C++ thingy, if you write code in the VM, or start to write some really weird Java code in the libraries, it's a good idea to mention that in the email as well. Also, of course, if there are places in your change where you yourself feel that this is very complex code, it would be very good to write that in email as well. Always include a link to the JBS issue. Always include a link to the patch. Or if the patch is small enough, you can actually include it in the email itself. Please note, though, that the OpenJDK mailing list do not allow attachments of this kind. So you cannot attach the patch like a diff file to your email. It has to be included in the actual body of the mail in that case. Also tell what kind of testing you have done. And also, if you consider this to be a trivial change, I will return to that in a minute, what that actually means. But that should be called out in the email. And also, if you are an author, this would be the place to ask for a sponsor to actually push your change. The tool that is currently mostly used for producing diffs and for reviews is called WebRev. Again, this tool is found in the Code Tools project. So you can download it from there. And it produces a bunch of different diff formats as a bunch of HTML files that you can publish on a web server. So that's most often what happens. People upload that to a web server and send a link to it in the email. So each of these reviews has to be open for at least 24 hours before you push your change. This is because the OpenJDK project is a global project. We have contributors from all the corners of the world. And to be inclusive and make sure that everyone has a chance to actually see the change before it gets pushed, we have this rule. There is a notion of trivial changes. You can call out in your email, as I said, if something is really small, like you fix a typo in a comment or something like trivial. these changes do not have to wait the 24 hours, but you must have approval from a reviewer. And then I mean a capital R reviewer, someone who has the reviewer role in the project. That person has to agree that this is a trivial change before you can actually push it under this rule. Also note that the definition of what a trivial change is may actually differ between different areas. So make sure that you read your feedback if you get any. Oh, you will get. I promise you, you will get feedback if you send something out for review. And also remember that the reviewer wants to improve the world just as much as you do, but just in a slightly different way. So even if the reviewer says in his reply something that sounds just like weird, make sure that you understand what the reviewer actually means before you reply. And be polite, even if you don't agree with what he's saying. After all, we want the community to hold together and be a friendly place to live. So always be polite. It's important. It's not very uncommon, actually it is quite common, to get replies as you are in the area. Do you mind fixing this as well? Don't be afraid to say no. Even if you're new and there's some senior person saying this, say no. If you make unrelated changes in your patch, the JBS issue must be updated to describe these changes as well. And really, for the sake of sanity, we want to have like every unrelated change should have their own JBS issue to make the history clean and make sure that everyone understands what changes are going in. So once you have your reviews, you would close the review. Everything requires at least one reviewer, like capital R reviewer again. If you make changes in the hotspot code, we actually require 2 reviews. So a reviewer and someone who is a committer should also review the change. Always reply to your reviewers. Thanks them for reviewing, and let them know that you consider yourself ready to push the change, so that everyone knows that the review is actually over. So, how do we do when actually pushing the changes? Well, that was like this clicker is interesting. So, if you are an author, or actually everyone needs to commit their change, of course. The commit comment should follow this template. There is the line with the bug ID that should tell the ID and the title of the bug that you're fixing. Reviewed by should contain the OpenJDK usernames of the persons who have reviewed the change. And if you're an author, you should also include the contributed by, which has your email, since you, in that case, won't have an OpenJDK username. Then export the patch and send it to your sponsor, and he will push it for you. If you're a committer, you can actually push everything yourself. So you use a tool called DevPath that is also included in the Code Tools project to set up the push path to the correct. So it uses SSH to actually push stuff. Always make sure that there are no new changes in the repository before you push your change. So do the hgin to look for new changes. And if there is any new changes, pull them and make sure that you also use the rebase flag to rebase your changes on top of the other stuff that has come in. And this is done to avoid unnecessary merges in the code base. Make sure that you have committed and added all new files that you have changed. Make sure you don't have any outstanding merges, and push your change. So once something is pushed, we have an automatic test system that is triggered for every push that goes into the repository. This is a continuous integration test system that runs in 9 different tiers. So tier 1, the first one, is basically the same, or it's exactly the same actually, as what is run in the submit forest. So provided you have tested your change there, that one should go through. If you have been around for a while and seen old mails in this area, you might recognize the terms of hotspot nightlists and product integration tests. These are now run as part of the CI pipeline, so we don't run any specific standalone tests for these things. So tiers 3 to 5 corresponds basically to the hotspot nightlist, and tiers 6 to 8 corresponds to what we used to run as the product integration tests. There has been some shuffling around there, but basically, mainly that's. So after you push something, make sure that you are around to handle any failures. You will get email notifications if some test is failing. The email might not be extremely informative because we can't really send too much information out outside of the Oracle firewalls. But if you get a mail, contact some Oracle engineer, and they will help you figure out what went wrong. In case there is any failures, you are expected to be there to handle it more or less immediately. It affects a lot of people if there are failing tests. So don't push and run, as we used to say. Pushing on a Friday afternoon is usually a bad idea unless you want to spend your weekend looking at these test results. Pushing like the last day before you go on vacation is also a very bad idea. If there is any failures, don't expect your change to be in there when you get back if you have failed to respond to these mails. Obviously, you can have someone else monitor your test results for you. So it's not like end of the world. But OK. The JDK 14 CI pipeline executes millions of tests every day, and less than 1 per mil of these executions actually fails. If you want to look closer into what actually have failed, there are, of course, JBS labels to search for in the database. But basically, this says at least something about the quality. The JDK is, as you know, installed on more than 3 billion devices, and you don't want to be the one who breaks it. So make sure that you test your changes very well, extensively. OK, so that was more or less my last slide. There's, of course, one of these things. And there's one of those. So there's the session survey. Please fill it out. I will also be talking tomorrow in the Oracle Groundbreakers Hub at 2 p.m. So if there's anything that you want to have more clarified, I'll be there to answer any questions. And I believe we actually have time to answer questions now as well, if there is anything. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening.